Hello and welcome back to World 360. Why is the South African army chief in Russia? What are the markets telling us about the election battle in Turkey? We discuss this and more in today's episode. So first up, the South African military chief's trip to Moscow. Now, Lieutenant General Lawrence Mbata, the commander of South Africa's ground forces, was in Moscow earlier this week to meet his Russian counterpart. What's interesting about this is the timing. Sure, such visits are planned weeks in advance, but Mbata's visit to Moscow comes just days after the US accused his country of secretly providing arms to Russia. More so, this comes ahead of the 15th BRICS summit, which is expected to see the leaders of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa gather in Durban. So let's rewind to last week. Last Thursday, the US ambassador to South Africa, Ruben Brigetti, claimed a Russian vessel had been loaded with weapons and ammunition from South Africa in December 2022. South Africa has tried to position itself as a non-aligned player with regard to the Ukraine conflict. But recent developments such as this suggest it's leaning Russia's way. For starters, South Africa conducted joint naval exercises with Russia and China in February and has largely abstained from votes in the UN on Russia's war, much like India. Officials in South Africa have said they do not want to be forced into choosing sides in the Ukraine war and have repeatedly urged both sides to resolve the conflict through dialogue and diplomacy. But back to the US's claims against South Africa. After the US ambassador to South Africa made his remarks, it created a storm, so much so that the South African president had to issue a statement saying an inquiry has been launched into the vessel in question. But interestingly, he didn't flat out deny that an arms transaction took place. So back to the South African army chief's visit to Moscow. What exactly happened? Well, according to a statement by the South African National Defence Force, Lieutenant Mbata discussed issues relating to military cooperation and interaction and visited educational institutions of the ground forces and enterprises of the military-industrial complex of Russia. The two sides also signed agreements to further increase cooperation between land forces and enhance combat readiness of the two countries' armies. In a way, South Africa's policy of non-alignment on the Ukraine war is slowly getting eroded, and it is now arguably one of Moscow's closest allies on the African continent. Let's also not forget that before it held naval drills with Russia and China in February, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made an official visit to South Africa, where he said he appreciated the country's position on the Ukraine war. What would be interesting to watch going forward is how South Africa handles the BRICS summit, which is set to be held in its coastal city, Durban. If you recall back in March, the International Criminal Court, or the ICC, issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin for alleged war crimes. This means that South Africa, which is a signatory to the ICC's Rome Statute, will have to arrest Putin if he lands on their soil for the BRICS summit. Now, 3 weeks ago, South Africa, in a major move, tried to withdraw from the Rome Statute under the ICC, which could have paved the way for Putin's visit. But the South African president ended up backtracking on this decision. For our second topic, we're looking at Turkey, where elections are underway. What's interesting is how the markets are behaving in reaction to incumbent President Recep Erdogan's lead in the polls. Erdogan is up against Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, his main challenger. Now, an election took place on Sunday, during which Erdogan secured 49.5% of the vote, while his rival received 44.89%. Since neither candidate secured the 50% threshold, a runoff election on May 28th will decide who becomes Turkey's next president. After his strong performance in the first round of elections on Sunday, Erdogan appeared very confident of winning the upcoming vote on 28th May. Let's not forget that he's been at the helm for the past 20 years in Turkey. However, his enthusiasm hasn't exactly been reflected in Turkish markets. If you've been following developments in the Turkish economy lately, you know that the Turkish lira has fallen immensely under Erdogan's unorthodox economic policies. Many of Erdogan's decisions have defied the fundamentals of economics. For example, the Turkish central bank has repeatedly cut interest rates despite record high inflation, which in turn has been devaluing the lira. Erdogan's main rival, however, has vowed to initiate sweeping economic reforms to lure back foreign capital. On Tuesday, Turkey's main banking stock index fell 9.6% as markets anticipated a possible continuation of Erdogan's policies. The cost of buying insurance against default on Turkish bonds also jumped to its highest level since November. So what does all of this mean for Turkey's economy? Well, a financial expert told Reuters, Erdogan retaining power would mean the status quo would be maintained for us, where we continue to decline Turkish business because of the state of the economy, because of the inflation, because of the weak currency, and because of his policy strategy. So stay tuned for the upcoming Turkish runoff election. Much will be in store not just for the politics of Turkey, but its economy too. For our last topic, we're looking at a 78-year-old US citizen who has been sentenced for life on espionage charges by China. John Shin-Wan Leung, a Hong Kong permanent resident, was found guilty of espionage, sentenced to life imprisonment, deprived of political rights for life, said a statement from the Intermediate People's Court in the eastern Chinese city of Suzhou on Monday. The man was first detained in April 2021, but interestingly, the US Embassy has been fairly mum about his case. The Department of State has no greater priority than the safety and security of US citizens overseas. Due to privacy considerations, we have no further comment, a spokesperson from the embassy said. It's quite a contrast to how the US has been batting for the release of its citizens imprisoned in Russia, such as basketball player Brittany Griner and Washington Post Journal reporter Ivan Gershkovich. Now, who is John Shin-Wan Leung? Leung is an American passport holder and a Hong Kong permanent resident. He was also a businessman who first established trade and cultural exchanges between Oklahoma City in the US and the Chinese city of Guangzhou in 1985. Leung's sentence also comes at an interesting time when China and the US have been lobbing spying accusations against one another, especially with the recent controversy concerning an alleged Chinese spy balloon over the US. Will a prisoner swap between the US and China be possible? It's hard to say, especially because China last month made amendments to its anti-espionage law, making the definition of spying and banning the transfer of any data all that more broad. Thank you so much for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint.